Masechet Avoda Zara Daf Tet Vav Nu Mishnah Makom Shenahagu Limkor Behema Dakar Goyim Mochrin Makom Shenahagu Shelo Limkor En Mochrim. If you live in a place where the custom is that one is permitted to sell small animals, this is small domesticated animals like sheep and goats, to non-Jews, then it's permitted to sell to them. But if you live in a place where the custom is not to sell it to them, then one is not permitted to sell sheep and goats to the non-Jews. The Gemara will explain that the concern here is for bestiality, depending on if one is in a place where the local goyim practice bestiality or not. Wherever you live, there is always a prohibition against selling to goyim large animals, oxen, cows. Now here, there's no problem of bestiality. People don't perform such a sin with large animals. Rather, the Gemara will explain the problem is that we are concerned that the non-Jew will use them as work animals on Shabbat. And one is responsible for his own animals even on Shabbat to make sure that they don't work. Now here he's selling it to them, so what's the problem? The Gemara will address that. He's talking about renting. We're worried that if he sells it to them, he'll rent it to them. And the Tanna Kama makes no distinction whether the animal is young, a young calf, which is not ready to work yet. It has to grow up. But maybe eventually will grow up. We don't make any distinctions. And there's also no distinction whether it is healthy or damaged. Even though a damaged animal is not going to be a work animal, it's not going to be able to pull a plow. But we make no distinctions. And once the rabbis say that you can't sell a large animal to non-Jews, that's it. You cannot sell it even if this particular animal is not fit to work. Rabbi Yehuda matir bishvura, ben betara matir besus. Rabbi Yehuda is more lenient, and he says if it is damaged, then it's permitted to sell to them because there's no way they're not going to. It doesn't work at all. He would agree with the young animals because they will grow up, but the broken one that's broken is still simply broken and permitted. Ben betara says it's permitted to sell the non-Jew a horse. And that's because horses are not used as work animals in the field to pull plows and things, but only to ride on. And the prohibition of riding on Shabbat riding an animal on Shabbat is more lenient than working an animal on Shabbat. Gemara asks, Lemema de isura leka min hagahu deika hecha dinig isur nehug hecha dinig eter nehug. Now, going on the first part where it depends on the custom of the place, it means that there's no prohibition regarding selling small domesticated animals to non-Jews, but rather it's based on a custom, and in a place where the custom is not to, so then don't. And in a place where the custom is to permit it, then you can. So there's no prohibition, technical prohibition, it's only a matter of custom, based on the Mishnah. However, this contradicts a later Mishnah on Daf Kaf Bet, Urminhi en ma'amidin behema bepundekaot shel goyim mipnei shechashudin ala rebi'ah. The Mishnah there makes it a blanket prohibition. One is not permitted to entrust an animal at an inn that's owned by non-Jews because they are suspected of bestiality. And this is your animal, and you're concerned about your animal being involved in such a sin, and you don't want to be responsible or enable such a sin from happening, and therefore there is a blanket absolute prohibition. It's not based on custom, it's not based on the place, it's based on an absolute prohibition of not entrusting. And so just like you can't entrust, so too you can't sell, and so this should be the same law. And so how come here in our Mishnah it depends on the place and it's only a custom, but in the Mishnah later on it's an absolute prohibition everywhere? Rav explains, no, indeed, there is a prohibition, but the prohibition depends on the place. Because in a place where one is permitted to sell, one is permitted to entrust, and in a place where one cannot entrust the animal with a non-Jewish innkeeper, one would be prohibited to sell it also. In other words, there are some places where bestiality is practiced by non-Jews, and so in those places, that's where this Mishnah is saying it's prohibited from giving it to them to hold for you to watch, and trusting it to them, where they will, the possibility that they'll have bestiality. And in those places, those are the places where our Mishnah says, if you're in such a place, then one should not sell it to them either. And in fact, it's based on the same principle. If you sell it to them, then also they may commit bestiality. So the prohibition here, as the same, only applies to those places where there's also a prohibition to sell. And the other way around, if you're in a place where bestiality does not happen, the population there does not commit such a sin, then in those places one is permitted to entrust the animal with them and to also to sell it to them. And so that way, both of these Mishnayot are compatible with each other. ורבי אלעזר אומר, אף מקום שאסור לייחד מותר למכור. מהטעמה גוי חס על בהמתו שלא תעקר. Rabbi Elazar, however, says, no, these are two different matters. And even in a place where it's prohibited to leave an animal in seclusion with a non-Jew, one is permitted to sell it to them, because there was a belief that if one commits bestiality with an animal, then the animal will become sterile. And a non-Jew would not want his own animal, if he owns it, to become sterile. Therefore, these two issues are independent from each other. So you could have a place where people are suspect of committing bestiality, but they would only do it with an animal that they don't own. If you go and give your animal to them to watch, hey, can you watch this for a couple of nights? Then they will commit bestiality, because they don't care. It's not their animal. They don't care if the animal becomes sterile. So there, you cannot entrust it to them. However, to sell it to them, no owner wants his animal to become sterile. You buy an animal and you want it to have offspring. And so they will not commit bestiality if they own it, and therefore these one can reconcile. In fact, there is an absolute prohibition to give an animal to hold, to watch for you in such places where they would commit bestiality. So that would be an absolute prohibition. But that's independent of the custom of selling it to them, because there are some places where you have to worry about bestiality, but still you would be allowed to sell it to them. And there's other places where that local customer says, you know what, let's not even sell it to them. So that is based on custom, because we're not directly concerned with bestiality if you sell it to them. And Rav, who originally gave this reasoning and tied the two issues together, eventually changed his mind and agreed with Rabbi Elazar, because we have a tradition in the name of Rav that non-Jews spare their animals and don't want them to become sterile, and therefore will not commit bestiality with their own animal. And so now we see that Rav indeed separated the two issues and would agree with Rabbi Elazar that there are places where people would commit bestiality and therefore you cannot entrust it to them, but you could still sell it to them because they would not endanger their own animals. In all places, one may not sell large livestock to non-Jews. My ta'ama, what's the reason? Okay, one is not concerned about bestiality with large animals. That does not happen. But one is concerned that the non-Jew will work an animal on Shabbat. Now, if I own an animal, I am not allowed to have it work on Shabbat. In fact, I have to make sure that it does not work on Shabbat. That's that's in the Ten Commandments, that I have to rest, and my family and servants and animals too. So therefore I can't sell to them, because then they might make it work on Shabbat. We ask about that. Well, so what if they let it work? Since they bought it, he acquires it. The non-Jew now is the owner. And non-Jews are allowed to work on Shabbat themselves, and their family, their household, their workers, their animals are also allowed to work on Shabbat. Shabbat is only prohibited to Jews and their animals. So once I sell it, it doesn't belong to me, it belongs to them. So what's the problem? Gezerah mishum she'ela umishum sechirut. And the answer is, it's only a gezerah, that because if I sell it to them and that's permitted, I will think that, just like I'm allowed to sell a work animal to a non-Jew, I could also lend it to them or rent it to them. Lend for free or rent for money. I would think that that's also allowed. One is a permanent sale and one is a temporary sale, so I might not make a distinction. But here, there in fact would be a problem, because if I am the owner and this person, this non-Jew, is renting it from me, it's working on Shabbat, I own the animal, and this animal is working on Shabbat, so that's not allowed. Therefore, the rabbi said, you know what, just like you can't rent it out on Shabbat, you don't even sell it at all, because then if you sell it, if you permit selling it, people will think it's permitted to rent it out. Shela kanya ve'agra kanya. We ask about that. Hold on. If someone borrows something, they do own it. They own it for that time. If I rent out my animal or lend it out for 1 month, so for that month, in fact, that person, the renter, is the owner. And so they should be permitted to work it on Shabbat. Right? Once I rent it out, it's a temporary ownership. And so there's no reason to make a gezerah, because even renting out or lending out should be permitted for the non-Jew to use it as they wish during that time, and even use it on Shabbat. So why should you make a gezerah for something that itself is permitted? Ela amar Rami bered Rav Yiba gezerah mishum nisyone dizimnin tezabena la nihale samuch lishkiat hachamad emale shabbata ve'amar le ta nasya nihale ve'sham'a le lekale ve'azla mechamate ve'nichale de tezal ve'avale mechamer achar behemto b'shabbat mechamer achar behemto b'shabbat chayav hatat. Rather, Rami, the son of Rav Yeva, explains, one is not allowed to sell a work animal to a non-Jew at all, because we are worried that one may come to test out the animal. For example, let's say someone makes a sale of an animal to a non-Jew right before Shabbat, just a few minutes before sunset. Okay, he makes the sale, and then the buyer says, I want you to test it out. I want to make sure that this is a good animal, that it's obedient and can work hard. And so he says to test it out. So then the Jewish owner, now it's already Shabbat already started, will say to the animal, right, come over here. And the animal knows the voice of its master, and it will start walking because of it. Now, the prohibition of working an animal would apply to leading the animal if you with a leash, or making it do something even by voice. That is also considered prohibition when it's doing something useful. And here it is doing something useful for you, because it's helping you to confirm this transaction, so that the non-Jew doesn't renege on it and say, oh, what is this? I agreed to buy this animal, but look, it's not obedient. It's not walking well. And so he is doing this on Shabbat, and the person wants, the Jewish owner wants it to walk. And then this will be a prohibition of driving an animal on Shabbat. And one who drives an animal on Shabbat that's doing work for him is liable to a korban hatat. And this is the reason why we prohibit selling an animal any time during the week, because if one is permitted to sell an animal at any time during the week, then it may come to a case where sometimes it will happen near Shabbat. And then, because it's right at sunset, the Jew may ask command the animal to walk on Shabbat and violate Shabbat. So therefore we prohibit it all week long. Matkif la Rav Shisha bered Rav Idi uschirut mi kanya v'hatanan af makom shamru laskir lo lebet dira amru mipnei shemachnis letocho avoda zara v'isakadatech schirut kanya hay ki kame'ayel lebete kame'ayel. Rav Shisha bered Rav Idi argues and tries to, and this answer is fine, but he wants to revive the previous answer that we make a gezerah because of renting, that if you permit selling, then you also permit renting. And we said about that, no, if you rent something, then the renter is actually the owner during that time. He's a temporary owner. And so the non-Jewish renter would be permitted to work it on Shabbat. So Rav Shisha is challenging that rule. Sechirut mikanya, is it true that the renter is considered the owner? Here is a proof from a Mishnah that is not true, that the owner remains the owner. The fundamental, the original owner is considered the owner, and the law follows his laws and not the renters, because here it is in Mishnah that we learn. Even in a place where one said that one can rent out a property to a non-Jew. That would be outside the land of Israel. Inside the land of Israel, one should not rent out property, but outside the land of Israel it's permitted. But even in those places where it's permitted, one cannot rent it out as a residence to a non-Jew. You can rent it out just to be as a workshop or for some other reason, but not to reside in, because the non-Jews will bring idolatry into that house. And this is a problem, because now you have a Jewish owner of an apartment, and the apartment, although it's being rented by a non-Jew, the non-Jew is bringing idolatry, and now the Jew is owning an apartment that has idolatry in it. And so that's a problem. Now, what do we learn from this Mishnah? If you think that the renter is considered the owner, so what? He's the owner. He could do whatever he wants in his house. It's not my responsibility. If a non-Jew owns a house and brings idolatry in, that's not my responsibility. So now, if you say he's the temporary owner, so he could do what he wants, what do I care? But the Mishnah doesn't say that. It says that the Jewish owner is responsible even during the time of rental. So isn't this a proof that the owner is considered the responsible party, even and not the renter? So we answer, Shana Avoda Zara dechamira tichtiv elo tabi to'eva el betecha. Idolatry is different because it's more severe. Because the pasuk says regarding idolatry, do not bring any abomination into your house at all. It goes above and beyond. And even if it's your house that you rented out, and so temporarily it's under the control of someone else, because it's idolatry, we're going to go and be very stringent and say, even if in general, for other things, the renter is considered the responsible party, the renter is the owner. When it comes to idolatry, you have to keep so far away from it that even if the renter is not Jewish, you still can't even be the owner of that apartment. But maybe that only applies to idolatry, but that would not necessarily apply to the laws of Shabbat. Where if as long as someone is renting it, so maybe for the laws of Shabbat, the renter is considered the owner and they can work it on Shabbat. So this is not a proof. Okay, so now another one. Matkif la Rav Yitzchak bered Rav Mesharshiya uschirut mi kanya vehatenan Yisrael shesachar para mikohen yachilena karshine teruma vechohen shesachar para Yisrael af al pi shemezonoteha alav lo yachilena karshine teruma. Now another challenge. Is this true, what you said before, that a renter is considered the owner, the temporary owner, and he's responsible for working it on Shabbat? So that wouldn't be a problem of renting it out on Shabbat, as we said before. But this is contradicted by a Mishnah, this time in Masechet Terumot, where it says, a Jew who rented a cow, Yisrael, a regular non-Kohen, a Jew, who rented a cow from a Kohen. Now the law is that if a Kohen owns an animal, just like the Kohen is allowed to eat terumah, so too his whole household, his servants, and even his animals are allowed to eat terumah. So now a Jew rented this animal from a Kohen. The Yisrael is permitted to feed the animal a vetch of terumah. Vetch is a vegetable that is mostly eaten by animals. Well, sometimes by humans, but mostly by animals. And so you have this terumah. Now, the Yisrael is allowed to feed it terumah, meaning that even though the Yisrael is renting it, it's still considered under the ownership of the Kohen, and therefore the animal can still eat terumah. And the other way around, if a Kohen rents a cow from a Yisrael, even though the Kohen, as the renter, is responsible to feed it, whoever's renting is responsible to feed it, nevertheless the Kohen cannot feed it terumah, vegetables of Tiruma, because it's owned by a Yisrael. So here's the explanation of the proof. If you think that the renter is the owner, then how come the Kohen cannot feed it Tiruma? The Kohen is the temporary owner, so should be allowed. Paradideu, it's his cow. Therefore, we learn from this, we prove from this that renting does not make someone the owner. The renter is not the responsible owner. He can use the item, but the owner remains responsible for it, and that applies to the laws of Shabbat. It applies to the laws of idolatry. It applies to the laws of Tirumah. And since it applies to the laws of Shabbat, so we can apply that here. So now that we have concluded that a renter is not considered the owner, but rather the original owner. So, if I, as a Jew, have an animal and I rent it out to a non-Jew, I am still responsible to make sure that that animal will not work on Shabbat. And so that for sure is not allowed. And since that's not allowed, we make a gezerah that I'm not allowed to sell my animal to a non-Jew, because if I permit selling it, then I will think that it's permitted also to rent it or also to lend it out. So those reasons now we bring back and they apply. And the other reason that we mentioned also, that I might test it out as in a sale. If the sale is close to Shabbat, then I might command the animal to walk. That's also another concern. So for all these concerns, we have a gezerah not to sell a work animal to a non-Jew. Rav Ada shera lezabune hamara ayeda de safsira. אם משום ניסיוניה לא ידעה לקלל דאזלה מחמתה. Rav Ada permitted owners of a donkey to sell their donkeys through a middleman. And he reasoned that it's permitted because none of these gezerot would apply in such a case. What are you worried about? Are you worried about testing the animal on Shabbat, that the owner, Jewish owner, is going to call to it? Here, the Jewish owner is not the one physically selling it. He is authorizing a middleman. Here, take this and you sell it for me. Or be as a middleman as basically flip it. Middleman can work two ways. Either you sell it to the middleman and he flips it within a short time, or he's selling it on your behalf. And so either way, the owner is back at home. He's keeping Shabbat just fine. The middleman, maybe he's selling it near Shabbat, but we're not worried that he's going to test it out because the animal doesn't know the voice of the middleman. So it's not going to listen to his command. And therefore, there's no problem of neither the owner nor the middleman calling to it and commanding it to walk. And if you're worried about that, if you allow selling it, then one will come to lend it and lease it out, and then the non-Jewish renter will be using it on Shabbat. We're not worried about that because since the animal does not belong to the middleman, he's not going to rent it out or sell it. He doesn't get any financial benefit by renting it out. Rather, he wants to flip it as quickly as possible. He only gets a commission if he sells it. Either way, whether he's taking ownership and then flipping it soon or not taking ownership, but just being the middleman and getting a commission, his interest is in selling it and not in renting it out. Furthermore, since he wants to sell it eventually, that's really immediately, but he certainly wants to sell it, he is not going to rent it out because he doesn't want a risk of getting a blemish in the animal and then the sale value will be less. So he's not going to risk taking a little bit of money for rent and then lower the sale value because that's really where he's making his money. And therefore, Rav Ada says none of the gezerot apply if you use a middleman. Rav Huna ben ahi para legoy. Amar le Rav Chisda, ma'itama abad morhachi. Amar le emul l'shchita zebana. Another sage that was lenient regarding this law, Rav Huna sold a cow to a non-Jew, even though we just said it's not allowed. So Rav Chisda challenged Rav Huna, says, how come you did that, right? Don't you know the law? That's not allowed. And Rav Huna says, no, I figured that the non-Jew is going to slaughter it. That was my assessment, that he is going to slaughter it, or it could be that he's going to slaughter it and not use it as a work animal. And the whole problem was that if he uses it as a work animal, he's going to use it on Shabbat. If you sell it, you're also going to rent it to him. But I followed the presumption that he is going to slaughter it and not work it, and therefore there's no problem. Now, how do you know that Rav Huna is bringing a proof? How do I know that I can use this logic and make an assumption that maybe he's going to slaughter it, and which would be permitted then, because then there's no way he's working it on Shabbat. I have a precedent from a Mishnah in Shevi'it. Itnan. Bet Shammai omrim lo yimkor adam para choreshet b'Shevi'it, u'bet Hillel matirin mipnei she'achol le'shochata. Bet Hillel says one may not sell a cow to a Jew during a Shevi'it year because he's going to use it to plow his field. And during a Shevi'it year, nobody is allowed to plow their field. And so I own this cow. I'm not going to use it to plow my field. I also should not sell it to another Jew, because the Jew is going to then use it to plow his field, and then that would violate putting a stumbling block before someone. That's Bet Shammai. Bet Hillel, however, says it's permitted to sell a cow to a Jew even during a Shevi'it, because we can presume that he's going to use it to slaughter, and you're allowed to slaughter an animal and eat it on Shevi'it. So I can assume the permitted intention and thereby sell it to him. And Rav Huna says, I'm using that as a precedent over here also. I'm going to assume that the animal that I'm selling to this non-Jew is going to slaughter and eat, and therefore I don't have to worry that he's going to work it on Shabbat. Amar Rabba, midame, Rabba challenges Rav Huna and says, wait, these two cases are not the same. Hatam en adam mesuvel shebitat behemto b'Shevi'it, hachad adam mesuvel shebitat behemto b'Shabbat. In that case, a person is not commanded that his animal should rest on during the Shevi'it. Right? It's true. One is not permitted to plow one's field during Shevi'it. Okay, that's true. I can't plow my field, but there's no prohibition regarding the animals to make sure my animals, wherever they are, will not be plowing a field. So that's why we can be more lenient and follow Bet Hillel in that case and assume he's going to do shechita. Since the whole law is lenient, we can be lenient and make the lenient assumption. However, when it comes to the laws of Shabbat, where I am responsible that my animals do not work, even if I'm not directly working them, I have to make sure that nobody is working my animals. So therefore, I cannot be lenient. I have to be more stringent and not sell my animal to a non-Jew just in case, and I'm going to rent it to him. He's going to use it on Shabbat. So Rabbah says, right, there's a distinction here. And so Rabbah is making a rule, which would be against Rav Huna, and his ruling is that if it's something that I am not commanded to be responsible for, then I can follow the lenient presumption. But if it's something that I am commanded to be responsible for, then I cannot follow the lenient presumption. That's Rabbah's assumption, ruling over here. We're going to challenge Rabbah from all sides. Two different sages are going to challenge Rabbah for these rulings. Amar le Abaye, v'chol hechad adam esuveh asur. Abaye says, is this true that if I am responsible for like my animal on Shabbat, then is that true that I have to follow the stringent presumption of what it's going to be used for? How about my field? I am commanded to make sure that my field, nobody works on my field. I can't work on my field, and I can't allow anybody to work on my field during the Shevi'it year. Utenan, Bet Shammai omrim lo yimkor adam sedeh nir b'Shevi'it u'bet Hillel matilim mipnei she'echol hobira. We learn in a baraita that according to Bet Shammai, a Jew is not allowed to sell his land during a Shevi'it year, because you have to worry. If I sell my land to a Jew during the Shevi'it year, then that Jew may start working the land. And so it's prohibited. I have to presume the stringency. That's Bet Shammai. But Bet Hillel says that's permitted for me to sell my land during a Shevi'it year to another Jew because I can presume that he's going to leave it fallow during that year. He's going to follow the law, and then he'll start working it the year after. So since it's possible that he's going to leave it fallow during this year, we want to make the sale now, and I would not to deal with the sale next year. So it is permitted. And so here you have a case, even though I am responsible to make sure that no one works my land on Shabbat, during Shavuot, still I can follow the lenient presumption. And so that challenges one side of Rabbah's ruling. And now the other side we also challenge. Matkif la Rav Asher. Is it true that as long as it's something that I am not responsible for, I am permitted and can follow the lenient presumption? אלו כלים שאין אדם רשאי למוכרן בשביעית, המחרשה וכל כלי העול והמזרה והדקר. But look, what about vessels? I am not commanded to make sure that my vessels are not used to work the land on Shavuot. I am responsible to make sure the land is not worked. But the vessels themselves, if someone goes and takes them, I'm not responsible for vessels like I would be for my animal on Shabbat. And yet, we learn in a Mishnah in Masechet Shavuot that the following vessels a person is not permitted to sell during Shavuot, and that is a plow and all the parts of the plow that go with it, and a yoke and the winnowing fork and a stake. Since these things are used to work land on Shavuot, I cannot sell them because I'm going to presume that the person buying them is probably going to use them to work the land on Shavuot. And I don't follow a lenient assumption. Oh, no, maybe they're just buying it for now and they're not going to use it this year. They're going to use it next year, or they'll use it for some permitted thing. No, even though I am not commanded regarding my kelim, nevertheless, I have to follow the stringent presumption. So this attacks Rabbah's the other side of Rabbah's ruling. So, Ela Amar Rav Asher, rather we're going to go back and explain the original meaning of Rav Huna, and why does he permit following a lenient presumption. Ela Rav Asher kol echad deika lemitla talenan v'afagav demsuveh, v'kol echad deleka lemitle la talinan afagav de'no mesuveh. Rav Asher explains that any time it's possible to give an innocent motive to something, we do assign it, and even if it's something that I am commanded to do, like the animal, giving my animal to a non-Jew, selling it to him, and even though I don't know if he's going to use it to work the land or to slaughter it, and I am commanded regarding my animal to make sure it doesn't work. But if there's a reasonable likelihood that he will use it as shechita, to eat it, then it's permitted, and that's what Avuna was assuming. But if it's a situation where it's not possible to presume the lenient permitted motive, then we do not presume it. And that would be the other general cases where a person is taking an animal, and this is an animal that is strong and a work animal, and not likely that one is going to buy this type of animal for slaughter. Then, even in a case where one is not liable for the item, like here regarding the Shavuot case, where what else are you going to do with these items? So it's true, I'm not commanded regarding these vessels to make sure that they don't work on during a Shavuot. No, I'm not commanded to do that. But what other presumption am I going to think that's being used for? Why would the person want to buy it now if he's not going to use it for his land now? And so since it's very unlikely that he has innocent motives, therefore I cannot sell it to him, even though I am not commanded regarding those vessels. So this ruling, this explanation of Rav Asher will apply to all the cases that we've brought and explain the distinction better. And since we follow, and once you have this, so then we exonerate and defend Rav Huna against the attack of Rabbah. Rabba zaben ahu chamara l'Yisrael hechashid limkor legoy. And that was a story about Rabba who sold a donkey to a Jew, but this Jew is suspected of reselling it to non-Jews. We know this guy. He sells his animals to non-Jews. Now, he is not allowed to sell to non-Jews. That's violating the halacha. But Rabba reasoned that it's okay for him to sell it to that Jew. Now he's challenged. Amar le Abaye, my tama abad mor hachi. Abaye says, what are you doing? Why are you selling your animal to this Jew? You know that he's probably going to sell it to a non-Jew. Amar le, ana li sel zabine. Says, listen, I'm following the law. I know Rabba says I'm not allowed to sell to a non-Jew, but I'm allowed to sell it to a Jew. So I'm following the law. I'm selling it to a Jew. Well, I have to worry about what happens after? Amar le v'ha'azil mzaben legoy. And Abaye says, yes, you do have to worry. Don't you know that this guy is suspected of selling animals to non-Jews, and so he's going to go and sell it to a non-Jew? And he answers, legoy kamezaben, l'Yisrael la kamezaben. Rabba says, is he going to only sell it to a non-Jew? Maybe he will sell it to a Jew. How do I know? And so this guy is true. He resells animals, but I don't have to assume that he's going to sell my animal to a non-Jew. It's also likely that he'll sell to a Jew, so I'm going to assign a positive, innocent motive to him, and therefore I considered it permissible to sell it to him. Itibe. Now Abaye challenges this assumption of Rabba. Makom shenahag limkor behema daka lekutim mochrin, shelo limkor en mochrin, mai ta'ama. We have a baraita that says, if you live in a place where the custom is to sell small animals to kutim. Kutim are Samaritans. They are not Jewish, but they do follow biblical law. They believe in Chumash only, not Nevi'im, not Ketuvim, not oral law. But the laws that they follow, they do follow strictly. So it says here that if you're in a place where people sell small animals to Samaritans, one can sell them. We're not worried about bestiality. Whereas if you live in a place where the custom is not to sell it, we do not sell it. Now, what's the reason why it would be permitted in some places and prohibited in other places? Is the reason that one cannot sell it in some places to a Samaritan because they are suspect regarding bestiality. But is that true? We're going to quote now a long baraita from which it proves that we are not worried. Samaritans, although they don't follow every law, but bestiality is in the Torah, and something that is explicitly in the Torah, they do follow. So we don't have to worry about that, as we prove from the following baraita batanya. אין מעמידים בהמה בפונדקות של גויים, זכרים 10 זכרים נקבות 10 נקבות, ואין צריך לומר נקבות 10 זכרים וזכרים 10 נקבות. One is not allowed to place an animal in a inn owned by non-Jews and leave it there, because we worry that these non-Jews it is common that they commit bestiality. And one is not allowed to do so in no matter what. Whether the animal is a male and the owner of the inn is a male, or both are female, those are not allowed. And certainly, if it's a female animal with a male owner or a male animal with a female owner, where it's even more likely that they will commit bestiality if they are of opposite sex. But even same-sex, one is prohibited. So all combinations, don't do it. Don't entrust your animal to a non-Jewish owner. ואין מוסין בהמה לרועש שלהן, ואין מייחדין עמהן, ואין מוסין להם תינוק ללמדו ספר למדו אומנות. And one cannot entrust your animal to their shepherd. Same reason that you're worried about bestiality. And one himself is not allowed to be in seclusion with a non-Jew, because we worry about also that there'll be danger, physical danger, or danger of sin. And one cannot give over one's child to a non-Jewish teacher for them to learn how to read, or for a craft, to how to read maybe a different language besides Hebrew, or to learn to be an artisan, a smith of some kind. One cannot do that because we are worried that this mentor, this teacher, will have relations with the child, which actually we know was done in Greek and Roman times. That was considered part of the teacher-student relationship among Greek philosophers, and people would actually do that. Homosexual pedophilia was considered proper in Greek society, and so one should not allow one's child to be in that situation. Aval mamidin behema bepunde kaot shel kutim zecharim esel nekevot unkevot esel zecharim vezarich lomar zecharim esel zecharim unkevot esel nekavot. However, the Braita continues, one is permitted of entrusting an animal to an inn that's owned by a Samaritan, and it doesn't matter what the combination is. It doesn't matter if the animal is male with a female or a female with a male owner. And it does, and certainly if both the animal and the owner are male or both female, whereas even less possibility, less worry about bestiality, all that is permitted. What we see from here is that that we do not worry, that we do not suspect Samaritans of bestiality. And furthermore, mosin behema shelahen, once you can give your animal to their shepherd because we don't worry about them. Umiachadim mahem mosim lahem tinok lamedo sefer lamedo umanut alma lachashide. And furthermore, one is permitted to be secluded with a Samaritan. We don't worry that they violate homosexuality. They follow the Torah, and you can give your child over to a teacher, a Samaritan teacher, to learn how to read or to learn a craft, because we don't worry about them committing pedophilia. All these are prohibited in the Torah, and they follow the Torah literally, so we don't worry about those things. Therefore, you see that we don't worry that the Samaritan is going to commit bestiality. Therefore, going back to this Braita, where it says that in a place where we do not sell it, one is not permitted to sell it. Why not? It's not because we're worried that the Samaritan himself is going to sin with the animal, but rather because we're worried that he will resell it to a non-Jew. And so, just like one may not sell a small animal to a Samaritan because we're worried about that he will resell it, so too Abaye objects to Rabbah. You should not sell your animal to a Jew because you should worry. Although yes, possible he might sell it to another Jew, but we know he likes to sell animals and sometimes he sells to non-Jews. So just like it's prohibited to sell to a Samaritan, it should be prohibited also to sell to a Jew who is suspect of reselling it to a non-Jew. That's part one of his question. Another part of his question, ve'od tanya, en mochlin lahem lo zayin velo kile zayin, ven mashchizin lahem et zayin, ven mochlin lahem lo sadan, velo kolarin, velo kebalin, velo shelaot, shel barzel, echad goy ve'echad kuti. Braita teaches that one is not allowed to sell weapons to non-Jews, nor other appurtenances to weapons, and one cannot sharpen the weapons for them. We're afraid that they're going to use them for killing and for violence against Jews, against other people. You can't be part of that. And one cannot sell them stocks for handcuffs, nor chain and neck chains. Kolad, here's a neck chain that they would use to arrest prisoners or hostages, and you can't sell it to them. And this is true. You can't sell it to a Jew, and you cannot sell it to a Samaritan either. So now to the non-Jew, we understand you can't sell it to them because they're going to use it for violence, and we can't be party to that. How about the Samaritan? Is it because Samaritans, we worry that they're going to go murder people? Is that true? Do we worry that Samaritans are murderers? You just said that you're allowed to be in seclusion with them, which means we don't worry that they're going to murder you while you're secluded with them, which was not true for non-Jews, but for Samaritans you can be secluded, so we're not worried that they're murderers. Rather, we're worried that he's going to resell it to a non-Jew. By the way, this is a really important source regarding selling arms. State of Israel, when they sell arms to other countries, is that permitted or not? Or a Jew who's involved in arms dealing, are they permitted to sell it to certain countries if that country is known to be a dictatorship and to use their weapons not just for defense but for torturing its own citizens or innocent people? Is that prohibited? Or can you sell it to a middleman or a country that will resell it. They themselves won't use it for bad purposes, but they will resell it to others who will use it for bad purposes. So this is an important source for all the laws regarding arms dealing. Okay, so from both of these sources, it's evident that one cannot sell animals nor weapons to a Samaritan, even though the Samaritans themselves will not use them for bad things, but we worry that they will resell it to a non-Jew. So too, that's a challenge against Rabbah. He should not sell his animal to a Jew who is a suspect of reselling for the same reason. Now, maybe you'll try to answer for Rabbah. A Samaritan is not likely to repent, whereas a Jew is likely to repent. So even if it's a Jew that in the past he had sold things to non-Jews, but you could still sell to him because he's a Jewish person and surely he will repent. And a Samaritan will not repent. So there's more likely that the Samaritan will resell to a non-Jew than a Jew who is suspect that will who will make teshuvah. ואמר רב נחמן אמר רבא בר אבו כדרך שאמרו אסור למכור לגוי כך אסור למכור ישראל לחשוד למכור לגוי. But this assumption is not true, because Rav Nachman said in the name of Rava bar Abu that just like one is prohibited from selling such items to a non-Jew, so too one may not sell it to a Jew who is suspect to resell it to a non-Jew. Once a Jew is suspect, that's it. We don't assume, he's going to magically make teshuvah. We have to, unless we know for sure he made teshuvah, we cannot assume that, and it's still prohibited. So Abaye told Rabbah all of these objections, and Rabbah accepted them. Rahit batre telata parsevi kadamre parsa bechala vela adreche. In fact, Rabbah tried to undo the sale, and he ran 3 parsangs after the buyer to try to get back the animals that he sold him, because he realized, I made a mistake, I should not have sold to them. Some say it was 3 parsangs, some say it was 1 parsang, but it was through sand, which is a lot harder to run through. But you see, he exhausted himself, he tried his hardest to try to get back the sale, but he cannot overtake the buyer and was not able to get the item back. But, he did learn it for next time, and we learn it also as the halacha. Amar Rav Dimi bar Abba, kederach she'asurim kol legoy, asurim kol listim Yisrael. Now we add another prohibition, just like one cannot sell weapons to a non-Jew. We're talking about, Meiri says about all these things, that this is talking about in a society where such things were rampant, where they don't have laws, morality, don't have a civilized society, and bestiality is rampant and killing is rampant, then one is prohibited from doing all these things. The media, however, says that this does not apply, it did not in his own time, when the non-Jewish society had its own laws, had a sense of morality, and was not involved in these things, then it's permitted. So we're talking about this certain time and place where such things we had to worry about. Okay, so anyway, he says, just like it's prohibited to sell these such weapons to a non-Jew, so too, one is prohibited from selling it to a Jew who is known as a bandit, because he's going to use these weapons for banditry, and you don't want to be part of it. Now, in what case did Rav Dimi bar Abba say this law? If it's talking about someone who is suspect of killing, and we know this person has a rumor that he's a murderer, he has a past of being a murderer, then obviously you can't sell it to him, because that's the same as selling it to a non-Jew, where also murder is rampant, so that would be obvious. And if he has no history of killing people, so there's no reason, why not sell it to him? He's just a common thief, he's just a pickpocket, so he doesn't cause violence to people, so why not sell it to him? לעולם דלה קטיל, ואחר מעסקינן במשמותה דזמנין דוד דאסולי נפשה. In fact, we're talking about a person who is he is a thief, but he has not killed before. That's true. He doesn't have a history of being violent, but we're talking about a case where he may use the weapons to save himself. Let's say he's caught. He's sneaking into someone's house or pickpocketing, and then he's caught. And in order to get away from being caught, he may use the weapons in order to cause harm to other people, even murder. And so, once someone is a thief, so then you can't give him such weapons, because because though he may use the weapons, although not to actively seek out people to kill, but he may use them in order to save himself. And so, since that's a likely enough situation, one cannot be party and help out such a person, and one cannot sell at weapons to a person like that. Baruch Adonai Le'olam, Amen ve'amen.